give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Ishaq Dar, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to express my gratitude to you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting. I welcome the participation of all distinguished ministers joining this important discussion today. I also thank Secretary General for his valuable briefing and thoughtful remarks. The Secretary General's voice has always been of wisdom and compassion in Palestine and beyond. To promote peace and alleviate human sufferings, we salute this dedication and devotion, Mr. Secretary General. Mr. President, we meet today in the shadow of a profound and deeply troubling tragedy. The Palestinian people are enduring unimaginable suffering, an unbearable daily toll of human lives, the destruction of homes and neighborhoods, and the obliteration of essential infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, and markets lie in ruins. Roads and utilities have been shattered. The very fabric of society has torn apart. Over 64,000 lives have been lost, and over 100,000 have been injured. These are not mere statistics. They were grieving mothers, anguished fathers, suffering children, and revered elders. The devastation is immense. The grief is immeasurable. The world must not remain silent. The humanitarian situation in Gaza has reached catastrophic proportions. Starvation grips the population, and famine has taken hold. According to the latest Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC) analysis, famine is now a reality in Gaza City, putting over 500,000 people at grave risk. In Khan Yunis and Deir al-Bala, famine looms imminently, threatening countless more lives. The ongoing military operations in Gaza City inflict a relentless toll. Dozens of Palestinians are killed each day, entire families displaced, and communities torn apart. Already, 300,000 people have been uprooted, and nearly 1 million face imminent displacement. The roar of fighter jets, the plumes of smoke from tank fire, and the collapse of buildings. What must this relentless violence mean for women, children, and the most vulnerable? And what of the hostages caught in the crossfire, whose lives hang in the balance? Mr. President, in the West Bank, illegal settlement expansion continues unabated. The latest E1 plan is grave violation of international law and relevant UN resolutions, as well as a stark manifestation of settler colonialism in the 21st century, a blow to the two-state solution. Mr. President, the time for action is upon us. Pakistan calls for the following urgent and concrete measures. 1. An immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire to halt the bloodshed and prevent further loss of lives. 2. Full unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza and the immediate lifting of the blockade to allow life-saving aid to reach those who are in need. 3. A categoric end to any forced displacement of Palestinians from their lands, while upholding the right of return for refugees in accordance with the international law and establishing an international protection mechanism. And, Mr. President, Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people in their just struggle for dignity, justice, and self-determination through the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and contiguous Palestinian state on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Pakistan welcomes the two-state solution conference chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We also commend the recent recognitions of the state of Palestine by numerous member states, a step that reflects adherence to justice and the principle of international law. Pakistan had the honor to be among the first few countries to recognize the state of Palestine following the Declaration of Independence in 1988. This positive momentum must be sustained with resolute determination, seriousness of purpose, and an unwavering commitment to achieving a just and lasting solution. Mr. President, the people of Palestine are facing a crisis of historic proportion. Their suffering is a stain on our collective conscience. Gaza has become a graveyard for the humanity as well as for the global conscience. We call upon the Security Council and the broader international community to act decisively, to uphold human dignity, to ensure accountability and deliver justice. The time for words has passed. The time for action is now. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Dar for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Tanya Fayon, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia.
President, and I thank the Secretary General for his briefing and his personal commitment to this issue. Mr. President, upon entering the UN Security Council, Slovenia felt the heavy weight of responsibility of this council to uphold international peace and security, a weight that translates to upholding international law and rejecting double standards, choosing global benefit over national interests, being ready for difficult conversations with partners and instead of silence. Everyone who enters this Security Council or is a permanent member of this body should know that membership entails a responsibility to act. And it does not matter whether a threat to peace and security is unfolding in Ukraine or in Gaza. In both of these conflicts, international law is disregarded blatantly and red lines crossed persistently. Excellencies, this year we again witnessed immense numbers of deaths among civilians in armed conflicts, with many of them being women and children, lives shattered by starvation and displacement. Let us be reminded we have built a system that should prevent atrocities, and we promised a never again. Yet what we saw this year was a Security Council paralyzed by disrespect of this Council's resolutions and disregard of decisions of international courts. Colleagues, we should stand up to this. When politicians facing charges for war crimes and crimes against humanity are walking free, while judges are put under sanctions, we cannot afford to remain silent without becoming complacent. Let me be clear, when all rules and obligations of the international system we had constructed fail, this itself is a threat to international peace and security. Mr. President, Gaza has become a textbook example of failure of international community. It has become a place in which people dread the nightfall and fear what a new day will bring. Gaza has become the deadliest place for children, the deadliest place for humanitarian and medical workers, and the deadliest place for journalists. The place of first ever proclaimed famine in the Middle East, marked by continuous offensives and strikes against hospitals, schools, homes, shelters, and holy places. It is defined by death and despair, and where hostages suffer and civilians count heartbeats left. Gaza is a man-made catastrophe which is live-streamed across the globe and sustained by those acting in contradiction, to everything we stand for. And Mr. President, existence of reasonable grounds to conclude or finding that acts may amount to genocide are threats to international peace and security. We commend the work of the judicial and investigative mechanisms, the ICG, the ICC, and the Commission of Inquiry, particularly for its latest report for sounding the alarm. It is not on us to question their findings, it is on us to act on them. And demands of a large majority of international community are not performative diplomacy. Calls for a ceasefire, irreversible political steps, and even simple expressions of solidarity are not stage-managed acts. They paint a dark picture of international community in despair, understanding that never again has become a failed promise. And Mr. President, the two-state solution is equally in a need of concrete and irreversible action. I welcome the new wave of countries recognizing the state of Palestine, and I call on others to take bold steps to recognize Palestine and normalize ties with both states. We must step up to prevent further disintegration of this vision and to counter occupation and annexation, forced displacement, human rights violations, and terrorism and extremism. Slovenia firmly supports the role of United Nations, including UNRWA, in addressing the ongoing crisis and in paving way to the two-state solution, and of the Palestinian Authority in carrying out reform and assuming full political ownership in the state of Palestine. And I appeal to all of us, do not let the future of Israeli people be defined by terrorism and violence. Do not let the future of Palestinian people be defined by occupation and perpetual human rights violations. And I appeal to you, do not let our collective future to be defined by the stain of the Gaza genocide. Act now. There is no bigger threat to international peace and security than a cycle of violence perpetrated by continuous fear, everlasting hate, and uncertain future. The stories of children starved to death, a threat of a population displaced, and a territory in fear should be all we need for us to understand that the time for the immediate, permanent, and unconditional ceasefire is now. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Fayon for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad, and African Affairs of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this session and for responding to the request of the Group of Islamic States in the Council. I also thank His Excellency, the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his valuable briefing covering the recent developments in the Middle East. This region has become synonym to destruction and devastation, a synonym to injustice and oppression, a synonym to criminality in its harshest forms and manifestations. How can it not be so, while this region has known all these horrors, horrors that no other region has known for successive generations? Without any exaggeration and without any qualifications, the situation there is self-telling, whether be it regarding the Palestinian cause, particularly all the regional landscape in the Middle East in general. On the Palestinian level, we cannot deny anymore that Gaza, and for more than 2 years, have been witnessing a full-fledged genocidal war. This has been confirmed by the UN Commission of Inquiry. And there is no doubt today that famine is indeed occurring in Gaza after our organization has confirmed famine in Gaza officially. There is also no room for interpreting the designs for displacement, reoccupation, and the annexation of Gaza and the West Bank after the Israeli occupation started implementing these designs and announcing them blatantly and brazenly. On the regional level, the Israeli aggressions continue unabated. An Israeli aggression against Yemen, followed by an Israeli aggression against Lebanon, then an Israeli aggression against Syria, followed by an Israeli aggression on Iran. And a few days ago, yet another Israeli aggression against the state of Qatar. Needless to say that this list might expand even further following the threats against other countries in the region. This is the unjust and tragic situation that the Israeli occupation is trying to entrench. The Israeli occupation is opening new fronts of aggression, one front after the other. This council does not have to solve riddles anymore, now that the Israeli occupation itself is boasting about its achievements. The Israeli aggression is first aiming at undermining any prospect for the establishment of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state, not on the ground alone, but also in the minds of people, if possible. Second, the Israeli occupation aims at redrawing the borders in the region based on its imagination and its illusions, basing itself on the most dangerous myth, which is the myth of Greater Israel. Third and last, the Israeli occupation aims at entrenching its absolute monopoly over the region and at having the final say in that region to attack whomever they want, whenever they want, and however they want. They give no regard to international law, nor to the UN Charter, and not even to the merest rules and customs related to civilized coexistence. Beyond all that, the Israeli occupation dares to promote their lies. They say that the Palestinians want them out, while they deny their right to exist, their right to life, and their right to build their own independent sovereign state. The Israeli occupation dares to promote their propaganda, claiming that they are alone, surrounded by enemies who want to destroy them, while they have been acting arrogantly against all the countries of the region. In addition to all the above, the Israeli occupation is claiming to be a shrine for democracy and the rule of law in the region, while they have proved for the whole world that they are the greatest danger to right and to law, and that they are the gravest threat threatening security and stability in the region and international peace and security. The tragedies and horrors that the Middle East is facing today require us to reconsider peace and security in the region and to approach them differently from a more comprehensive perspective that accepts no fragmentation. The issue of security in the Middle East did not start on the 7th of October 2023 in order to be associated and reduced to that date. That would be unjust and biased. The history of the region runs parallel to the history of this organization. It proves that the Palestinian cause remains the central cause that cannot be obliterated, that cannot be ignored, and cannot be marginalized. Today, we see for ourselves how attempts at liquidating this cause only added to its legitimacy and made it the most just cause on the planet. The history of the region is carved into the resolution of this Council. This history proves that there is no alternative to the two-state solution and to the establishment of the State of Palestine along the borders of 1967 with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. This is the just, lasting, and final settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian crisis or conflict. Today, we also see for ourselves how the designs to obliterate this state only made it more resolute through the diplomatic recognitions. Algeria welcomes these recognitions and calls for strengthening them in order to grant the Palestinian state a full membership in our organization. The history of the organization is also rooted in international legitimacy. This history proves that there is no alternative to putting a final end to the exceptional, unjust treatment granted to the Israeli occupation, including impunity, non-accountability, and no punishment. And today, we also see for ourselves how the overwhelming majority of the member states believe in the importance of dissuasion and accountability for those who believe that they are above all the rules, regulations, and laws that others are respecting. Furthermore, the history of the region also shows that security and stability in the Middle East will not be achieved if our Council does not shoulder its responsibilities. The fate of the Palestinian cause and the fate of the Palestinian people, the fate of all the countries and peoples of the region, all these fates depend on the will of this Council and on the Council's ability to impose the respect of its resolution, to impose the respect of international legitimacy, and its ability to dissuade all violations and to end impunity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Attaf for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Musa Timothy Kaba, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, I thank His Excellency Cho Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for convening this meeting at the request of Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, Pakistan, and Sierra Leone. I also thank the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for his important briefing. My delegation commends the principled leadership of the UN Secretary General and the work of the UN teams in the field. Mr. President, the overall situation in the Middle East remains fragile and evolving. However, while some areas such as Lebanon and Syria are experiencing significant less violence than before, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, in contrast, are in very dire circumstances, with civilians enduring over 23 months of unimaginable and increasing violence. We recall the attack by Hamas and other armed groups of 7th October 2023 that led to the killing and taking of hostages of Israeli civilians, and reiterate our unequivocal condemnation of that heinous action, especially the taking of hostages. Sierra Leone further recalls that since the start of this conflict, the Council has remained seized of this subject, having received extensive briefings on the prevailing security, humanitarian, and political situation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We regret that effort by this Council and the mediators to secure a deal that allows for the cessation of hostilities have been met with challenges. In this regard, we have concluded, along with other member states, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only be resolved by peaceful means and that the military option is not viable. The atrocities committed on and since the attacks of 7th October 2023 highlight the urgency of finding a comprehensive and lasting solution to this long-standing conflict. Sierra Leone remains dedicated to supporting international efforts toward a political, just, and comprehensive settlement that ends the occupation, stops settlement expansion, and addresses extremism and terrorism. Sierra Leone is gravely concerned that the continuation of this war deepens despair among civilians in the Gaza Strip and the hostages held by Hamas. With intensified hostilities, significant loss of life, destruction of critical civilian infrastructure, blockades and evacuation orders, the civilians in the Gaza Strip, including women and children, have borne the brunt of this war. The current status quo is unacceptable, as it is unbearable for the civilians with no seeming hope of survival. This is a blatant violation of the United Nations Charter, the provisions of international humanitarian law, and Security Council resolutions. Guided by the UN Charter, international law, and the rule of law, we emphasize the following key points. First, a complete cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and an irreversible political process leading to a permanent ceasefire. The parties to the conflict must recommit to ongoing peace efforts and take concrete steps that will prevent further atrocities. We acknowledge and commend the efforts of the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, and the United States to achieve this end. Second, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, including Israeli civilians held by Hamas and Palestinian detainees held without due process. The immediate and unconditional lifting of the aid restrictions and restoration of full and unhindered humanitarian access. We emphasize the role of the United Nations and its partners, including UNRWA, to achieve this end. Third, Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwavering support for the two-state solution based on relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1812 of 1947, and consistent with Article 4, Sub 1 of the United Nations Charter. We welcome the endorsement by the General Assembly of the New York Declaration and reaffirm the legitimacy of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, including their right to an independent and sovereign state over the entire occupied Palestinian territory, in line with international law and agreed parameters. Fourth, Sierra Leone supports Israel's right to exist in peace and security, free from threats and attacks. Accordingly, we urge all armed groups to disarm and renounce violence, paving the way for the demilitarization of the Palestinian territory. Sustainable peace cannot take root while armed groups continue to operate outside the law. We deplore and reject any attempt to forcibly displace Palestinians from their land. Palestinians temporarily evacuated must be allowed to return to their homes at the earliest opportunity. Finally, Mr. President, we emphasize the need for the Palestinian Authority to be fully empowered and supported politically, financially, and administratively to enable it to continue implementing its credible reform agenda. As we celebrate the 88th session of the United Nations, let us reflect on the principles on which this very institution was built. Among its core values is to promote peace, justice, and the dignity of all persons. We must exercise the political will to deliver peace to the Palestinians and Israelis. Ongoing international efforts are a positive step that must be fully leveraged by both parties in good faith. The time to act is now in order to save the Palestinian people from the scourge of war. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kappa for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hugh Hilton Todd, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Guyana.
Mr. President, as a member state of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, OIC, Guyana thanks you for facilitating the group's request for convening today's meeting. I also thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his remarks and for his consistent and principled advocacy on behalf of the Palestinian people and for peace in the Middle East region. Mr. President, the protracted Israeli aggression against Palestine cannot continue to be a defining feature for the politics in the Middle East. In recent times, the aggression has extended to other countries in the region, heightening instability and insecurity, driving Israeli poles away from its neighbors and undermining good neighborliness. The ongoing war in Gaza has itself become a catalyst of pain and pressure. Pain for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are the targets of Israelis' instruments of war, starvation, bombs, bullets, displacements, dispossession, and other cruelties solely intended to subjugate the Palestinian nation. We have seen, for example, how famine unfolded in Gaza in full view of the international community, and 192 countries, could not stop it. The war in Gaza has also become a catalyst for pressure, political pressure, which seems to be the only way the occupying power might respond to the international outcry against the genocidal acts being perpetuated against Palestinians. Guyana calls on the member states of the United Nations to ensure that their engagements with the State of Israel do not in any way contribute to prolonging the war in Gaza and the Israeli oppression of the Palestinian people. It took a collective effort to dismantle the system of apartheid in South Africa, and Guyana firmly believes that an equally strong and organized international response is needed to ensure the end of the occupation of the Palestinian territory. I must underscore the importance of recognition of the State of Palestine by all UN member states as a pivotal part of forcing an end to the Israeli occupation. Recognition lends greater strength to international efforts to end the occupation and to achieve an independent Palestine. On the question of the occupation, Mr. President, allow me to recall that more than 1 year ago, the International Court of Justice issued its advisory opinion confirming that Israel's prolonged occupation of the Palestinian territory is illegal under international law and must be brought to an end. The General Assembly later demanded that Israel end its occupation within a year. That is by the 18th of September 2025. That date has now passed without compliance on Israel's part. On the contrary, we have instead witnessed a series of developments that only entrench the occupation further and destroy the two-state solution. Ghana calls on Israel to respect the Charter of the United Nations, to abide by the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly, the Security Council, and other organs of the United Nations, to cease its contempt of international law, and to commit to true peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, the occupation of the Palestinian territory and the attendant ills is a historic tragedy of proportions that should shock the human conscience across the globe. Sadly, however, what we are witnessing is an othering of the Palestinian people that makes it difficult for some to see Palestinian people as they see their own people. We must all reject the othering and fight for the rights of the Palestinian people, as we would fight for the rights of our own people. The right-minded, the peace-loving, and the promoters of justice must continue to defend the Palestinian people and oppose all attempts to erase them from their homeland. I conclude, Mr. President, by reaffirming Ghana's continued commitment to the two-state solution and by underscoring our conviction that the rule of law will ultimately prevail in the decades-long question as long as all member states choose to be guided by the principles of the Charter. I also reiterate the calls we have consistently made over the last 2 years for a ceasefire in Gaza. For the release of all hostages held in Gaza and Palestinian detainees held in Israeli prisons, for the unimpeded humanitarian access in Gaza. I also call on Israel to cease all its actions that are dismantling the two-state solution and the possibility of peace in the Middle East region. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Todt for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Lars Løkke Rasmussen, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I want to thank Mr. Cho Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for convening this meeting. And I also want to thank the Secretary General for his very insightful briefing. Through the chaos of this abhorrent war, he has consistently raised his voice and that of the United Nations in support of peace, and Denmark commend this kind of leadership. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the tireless efforts and sacrifice of the UN staff on the ground. Colleagues, I'm speaking to you today not only as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, and by so a politician responsible to the people of Denmark, but also as a member of this Council responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, and as a grandfather, responsible to my grandchildren, who I'm totally convinced one day will ask what I did, what we did, in the face of such immense suffering. Colleagues, I ask you today, how will we answer them? That we stepped up and met the challenge of peace, or that we idled in inaction and watched helplessly as the horrors unfolded? Mr. President, nearly 2 years have passed since the war in Gaza began. It was unleashed by the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on the October 7th, an attack that tore through Israeli families, that left parents without children, children without parents, a nation wounded to its core, hostages and their families going through unimaginable suffering. Denmark has condemned this attack in the strongest terms possible, and we will continue to do so, just as we will continue to insist on the immediate and safe release of every hostage. Denmark considers itself as a long-standing friend of the people of Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself against terrorism. This I have always supported, and this I will continue to support. But friends also have to speak the truth to each other. And today we must face the fact that Israel's war in Gaza has created a humanitarian catastrophe of unbearable scale. Israel must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. The human suffering in Gaza must be brought to an end, and it must happen now. Tens of thousands of civilians have already been killed, including over 18,000 children. This constitutes a classroom of children every day. It constitutes a humanitarian and human failure of unprecedented scale. We are witnessing an ongoing expanding military operation in Gaza City. Children starving with no access to clean water or medicine. Doctors forced to amputate without sedation. Mothers powerless to feed their babies. A famine unfolding before our eyes. While the World Food Programme alone has enough food to feed Gaza for months waiting at the border. This is also why Denmark, on behalf of the E10, coordinated a resolution for this Council just last week. The resolution demanded a ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and that the government of Israel immediately lift all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza in line with international humanitarian law. These are demands that the international community has reiterated on multiple occasions, including just yesterday in the General Assembly. And I deeply regret that the resolution did not receive the support of all 15 Council members. But today I restate these demands. Israel must change its course immediately. The war in Gaza must end. The Security Council, as the body responsible for international peace and security, should be able to make these demands. Indeed, this should be the bare minimum that we can do. But around this table, that means all of us, every single member, working in concert and common cause towards this goal. It means setting aside political differences to save lives. Last week, 14 members of this Council were willing to do this. We hope that this can soon become all 15. So to our American friends, just this morning, President Trump said that we have to stop the war in Gaza immediately. He said we have to negotiate immediately to negotiate for peace. Denmark continues to support the dedicated efforts of the US, Qatar, and Egypt to mediate a ceasefire. Your unwavering commitment to find a path to peace is critical in the context, but we count on you in this Council too. Your leadership is critical in our joint aspirations of bringing peace and stability to the region. Mr. President, I will conclude very soon. Denmark has consistently contributed to ease the suffering through humanitarian contributions. Together with 24 other countries and the EU, we have called on Israel to resume medical evacuations from Gaza to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and we stand ready to support the treatment of those patients. Mr. President, 2 weeks ago, I visited the region, which I have done several times since 7 October. I have met with the Israeli families of hostages. The pain is real. The demand must be immediately and unconditionally answered. I also met with Palestinians in the West Bank who face checkpoints, settlements, settler violence, destroyed property and land grabbing, and their pain is real as well. The longing for freedom and dignity is evident. So, Mr. President, the two-state solution remains the only solution to lasting peace for two people, both deserving of security, both deserving of dignity. This was confirmed during the high-level conference on the two-state solution yesterday. It is clear that the momentum is growing, that we are witnessing a renewed energy and enthusiasm for peace based on the two-state solution, a solution that Denmark is prepared to build on. And this is why I said yesterday, and that I repeat today, the keys to recognition of the Palestinian state should no longer lie in the hands of the Israeli government. The Palestinians themselves must become masters of their own destiny. The time for the end of this decades-long struggle is now. The only path to lasting peace is the two-state solution for both Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Rasmussen for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Yvette Cooper, MP, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom.
Can I thank the President today and also the Secretary General for the briefing at the beginning of this crucial session. Yesterday, alongside other ministers here in New York this week, I hosted a session to hear from doctors who have recently returned from Gaza. And the stories they told would stay with me forever. One told of the screams of toddlers and the scream of a toddler who she had operated on without full anesthetics, and how she hoped and prayed that he would not feel pain. Another told of the seriously malnourished pregnant women affecting their babies, and they talked about doctors and nurses whose family members were killed but who still came back to work in hospitals in unimaginable conditions to help others. And they told of how the absolute basics of modern medicine, like antibiotics and anesthetics, things that we around this council table take for granted for ourselves and our loved ones, were unavailable, blocked and denied. And we say the words humanitarian crisis, but this is what it means, the pain and the screams of a toddler who cannot get the basic health care that they need. And only 18 out of 36 hospitals in Gaza now remain open, all of them struggling to operate amid severe shortages of fuel, medicine, equipment and staff. Over 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza, more than 300 detained. This is what the catastrophic collapse of Gaza's healthcare system looks like. And as we are gathered here, Israeli forces are escalating the conflict in Gaza City, pounding more homes into rubble, sending frightened families scattering. It is incomprehensible, it is inhumane, it is utterly unjustifiable, and it must end. All that this action from the Israeli government will do is make a catastrophic humanitarian situation worse. More healthcare in crisis, harder than ever to get desperately needed aid to those who need it, more innocent children enduring a man-made famine, more civilians killed, but making it harder to get the remaining hostages out. Hostages who are still being held, who were seized by Hamas on the barbaric terrorist attack of October the 7th, and are still being held in the most horrendous conditions, prolonging the anguish for their families. And I reiterate our condemnation of Hamas and that barbaric terrorism in October the 7th. I met with some of the UK-linked hostage families again last week. Their ask of all of us is to keep the hostages at the forefront of our minds, to do everything we can to give their loved ones the chance of coming home and to achieve a ceasefire that gives them the chance to do that. And that must be our task. We know what needs to be done. We need a ceasefire now. We need the release of all the hostages. We need the immediate restoration of aid and support for medical care. And we need a broader framework for the lasting peace. And I welcome and support mediation efforts being made by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt to seek an end to conflict and to seek peace. We know too that Gaza cannot be seen in isolation from the West Bank. The Israeli government is tightening its stranglehold on the Palestinian economy and continuing to approve illegal settlement construction, including just recently in the E1 area of East Jerusalem, which is a further blow to the viability of a two-state solution. And we urge Israel to reverse these plans. After 2 years of bloodshed, I believe the world is united in wanting this awful war to end, united in wanting all the hostages released, united in rejection of any role for Hamas in the future of Gaza or the future of a Palestinian state, united in wanting Israel to unblock aid and end the humanitarian catastrophe, and united in wanting a better and more peaceful future for the region, with the reconstruction of Gaza, the dignity for its people, and a new era of relations to support their collective security. And that future must be based on a two-state solution. The UK's historic recognition of the state of Palestine this week is part of our commitment to peace, part of acting to protect the viability of the two-state solution as the only path to a just and lasting peace and to security for Palestinians and Israelis alike, part of rejecting extremist ideas on all sides, which involve too often fantasies of the destruction of the state of Israel or expulsion of the Palestinian population. We reject both of those, and part of our wider effort to work with partners on a long-term peace, not just to halt the immediate crisis, but to advance a pragmatic plan for what comes next. None of this can happen without an immediate ceasefire, and that is where all of this has to start. One of the doctors yesterday described the impact on children of growing up in trauma and devastation. And those will be the consequences on generations to come if we do not act now. We owe it to all of those children growing up in Gaza, across Palestine, across Israel. We owe it to all of them to build a better future. The time for peace is now. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Cooper for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Georgios Gerapatritis, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank you personally for convening this important meeting today at a very critical moment for the Middle East. Distinguished colleagues, what we have been witnessing in the Gaza Strip, words fail to describe. The humanitarian catastrophe is ongoing. For almost 2 years, the civilian population has endured conditions that are unsustainable and deeply concerning. No one should be compelled to live under such circumstances. The expansion of military operations in the city of Gaza has led to further displacement and risks, worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis. This reality endangers civilian lives. Any further escalation in Gaza, which worsens the already dramatic situation for civilians, must be avoided. The plight of children underscores the urgent need to guarantee safe, unhindered, and sustained humanitarian access at scale to all parts of Gaza, in full respect of international law and international humanitarian law. Mr. President, Greece is actively engaged in all efforts to alleviate the suffering of the people in Gaza. We have consistently provided humanitarian assistance. We have already welcomed injured children from Gaza for treatment in Greek hospitals. On another strand of effort, we voted in favor of every draft resolution that would address the crisis in Gaza, the latest demanding the lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. And this past May, I stood alongside the representatives of 80 UN members here in New York, reaffirming the significance of protecting civilians in armed conflicts. humanitarian access is crucial to alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian population. Safe access to food, water, shelter, clothing, and medicines throughout the territory must be guaranteed, and international humanitarian law must be respected. Initiatives to expand deliveries in Gaza by land, air, or sea must be further strengthened. At the same time, hostages continue to suffer horribly at the hands of Hamas. We were appalled by the images and videos released last month showing 2 hostages visibly emaciated as they described the appalling conditions of their captivity. We reiterate our call for unconditional release of all remaining hostages. Mr. President, we recall that this Council has rightly addressed the recent strikes in Doha earlier this month, which are even more concerning given Qatar's crucial role in hosting and mediating negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas alongside the United States and Egypt. We continue to believe that diplomacy remains the most effective tool even in the most difficult circumstances. Greece has unwaveringly supported the negotiation efforts and will continue to do so. And we urge all parties to rise up to the gravity of the situation, return to the negotiating table as soon as possible, and be guided by international law. Mr. President, recent settlement expansion in the West Bank and settler violence further impair the prospects for peace. We express our profound concern over announcements on the construction of additional settlements in the E1 area of West Bank. Such plans, were they to be realized, would further undermine the prospects of a two-state solution. The escalation of settler violence, including against Christian communities, is a cause for grave alarm as well. It needs to stop now. Mr. President, however remote or difficult the prospect may seem today, the two-state solution remains the only viable path forward. We need to provide the Palestinian people with a credible prospect of hope for the future. This is an indispensable condition for peace, stability, and security in the region, including the long-term security of Israel. We appreciate in this vein the leadership demonstrated by France and Saudi Arabia in co-chairing the two-state solution conference. We stand by all international initiatives, including the relevant global alliance and the Arab plan, towards realizing this vision. We will continue to contribute to every effort that revives the political process towards a two-state solution, a political process which we firmly believe must lead to the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state through a revitalized and comprehensive approach, and which is essential for lasting peace and stability in the region. Against this backdrop, we see no role for Hamas, neither in governance nor in future discussions concerning the day after in Gaza. Therefore, Greece has repeatedly stressed that an empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority must play a central role in Gaza's future and remains the best partner for peace. The European Union has already stepped up, approving a 3-year package worth around 1.6 billion euros, crucial to preventing fiscal collapse and enabling the Palestinian Authority to fulfill its task. Mr. President, to Greece, the stability of the Middle East is not an abstract concern. It is an indispensable necessity. As a country of Eastern Mediterranean, at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, developments in the region have a direct impact on our own security, prosperity, and stability, as well as on Europe as a whole. We are convinced that only through dialogue and the rule of international law, we can build a safer neighborhood, one where peoples can coexist in dignity and security. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gerard Petritis for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Carlos Arturo Hoyos Boyd, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
Señor Presidente. President, Panama is grateful for the convening of this briefing at the request of the delegations of Algeria, Guyana, Pakistan, Sierra Leone, and Somalia. We would also like to express our thanks to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, for his briefing, which strengthens this Council's obligation, in line with the United Nations Charter, to respond with unity and responsibility, given the scope of the catastrophic situation unfolding in the Palestinian territories. For more than 7 decades, the Israeli-Palestine conflict has been characterized by a lack of political will to resolve its root causes, paving the way only to mistrust, extremism, and violence. The consequences of this lack of political will were brutally exposed on the 7th of October 2023 with the atrocious attacks carried out by Hamas, which we strongly condemn once again, and which claimed the lives of more than 1,200 people and kidnapped another 251 people, of whom it is believed that 20 are still alive, suffering in the darkness of tunnels, deprived of contact with their families and the most basic dignity. That episode only triggered a spiral of violence that led to an unprecedented war, given its scale of devastation in the Gaza Strip. More than 65,000 Palestinians, including 18,000 children, have died. Tens of thousands have been injured. Millions have been forcibly displaced from one side to the other, again and again, and entire communities have been reduced to rubble, leaving an indelible scar of suffering for thousands of families. In the 59 days that the ceasefire lasted for between January and March, it was possible to stop human suffering, to facilitate humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza, and to make progress in releasing the hostages. But since the ceasefire broke down, the catastrophic humanitarian situation has only got worse. More than 14,000 Palestinians have died and tens of thousands more have been injured. The hostages and their families continue to pay an unbearable price, trapped in uncertainty and suffering. As if violence were not enough, hunger is also claiming lives every day. The Integrated Food Security Classification has declared starvation in Gaza, famine in Gaza. More than 425 people, including 125 children, have died of hunger, not because there is a lack of food, but because of the obstacles preventing food from getting in. This tragedy has been exacerbated by the further development of the military operation in Gaza City, which is still inhabited by hundreds of thousands of people, and which has become the backdrop to intense bombing and land operations that have led to widespread displacement and dozens of deaths, including those of children. The devastation is also affecting essential services. Hospitals and health centers have been damaged, water supply systems, sanitation systems are collapsed, and there is extreme danger for those who are trying to save lives or tell the truth about what is happening. Humanitarian staff and journalists, of whom hundreds have been victims of the violence, nevertheless continue to carry out their work in unbearable conditions and under constant threat. No goal can justify using methods that violate international law or the protection of human life. That is why Panama once again calls for an immediate, sustainable ceasefire. We also call for the immediate, dignified, unconditional release of all of the hostages and safe, sufficient, unhindered access for vital humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. These are the basic conditions of humanity that cannot be put off any longer. President, the crisis is not limited to Gaza either. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, violence has reached alarming levels. Land fragmentation, insecurity, and a lack of prospects are undermining the possibility of any sustainable political solution. This year alone, more than 186 Palestinians and 16 Israelis have lost their lives in incidents in this area as a result of the conflict intensifying. This is in addition to hundreds of people who've been injured and thousands of people affected by restrictions that are conditioning their everyday life. The military operations and widespread detentions have displaced entire families, including children and older persons, while further closures and obstacles are threatening to isolate communities and cut off access to schools, hospitals, and workplaces, which is making an already unsustainable situation even worse. In addition to this, the recent unacceptable incident in Qatar, which we unequivocally condemn, reiterates the need to put an end to this conflict before it escalates any further. President, Panama reiterates that there is no military solution to this conflict, only a serious, comprehensive, and sustained political process based on international law and on the relevant resolutions of this Council, which allows Israelis and Palestinians to live in security and dignity within internationally recognized borders and with guaranteed rights and with verifiable guarantees for both. That is the only solution. That is the only possible way to put an end to decades of suffering and to pave the way to reconciliation. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hoyos Boyd for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Korean presidency for convening this meeting based on the request from the OIC members of this council. I would like to welcome all the distinguished ministers participating in this meeting today. I would also like to express our gratitude to the Secretary General for his briefing. Mr. President, we remain gravely concerned about the continued escalation of Israeli military operations in Gaza. As we speak, these military operations are expanding rapidly, and for the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, it's a death sentence, literally and figuratively. Since this war began, over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them women and children. Last month's IPC report has removed all doubts about what's happening in Gaza. Famine is no longer looming. It is taking place now. It is taking place now in front of our all eyes. The death of children from hunger and disease is not a forecast. It's a daily reality. Let us be absolutely clear. This is a man-made disaster created through siege, blockade, and systematic obstruction of humanitarian aid. The starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited, and the use of hunger as a collective punishment is a grave violation of international law. We must act with moral clarity. The International Court of Justice advisory opinion unequivocally reaffirmed the legal obligations of all states regarding the occupied Palestinian territory. These obligations are binding and they must be enforced. The blatant disregard for these binding decisions, including the provisional measures issued in January and March of this year, is a direct challenge to the international legal order. In that regard, I would like to make the following points. First, we reiterate our call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire. It's clear that there is no military solution to this conflict. Somalia recognizes and supports the ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Qatar, the United States, and Egypt, and commends their unwavering commitment. The Israeli airstrikes on residential areas in Doha, the capital of Qatar, on September 9th mark a grave and perilous escalation. It's appalling that this military airstrike unfolded when negotiators were engaged in talks over a US-backed ceasefire proposal. We stress that mediators must not be targeted, but they should be protected to ensure a pathway to peace remains viable. Second, my delegation calls for the immediate and full restoration of humanitarian access for all UN agencies, including UNRWA, throughout Gaza. Israel, as the occupying power, bears the legal responsibility under international humanitarian law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention. Somalia reiterates its call for the immediate release of all arbitrary detainees to return to their families and loved ones. Third, we must revive a credible political track towards the recognition of the State of Palestine as full member of the United Nations and stress the importance of the unification of Gaza and West Bank under a single Palestinian Authority. We call for international support for the reconstruction and development in the Palestinian territories, including Gaza. There's no doubt that addressing the root causes of the conflict begins with the end of the occupation and the establishment of a sovereign, independent state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital in accordance with relevant UN resolutions. In that regard, we welcome the resumption of the two-state solution conference co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We commend the states who have recognized the state of Palestine and urge others to do so. Mr. President, to conclude, Somalia reaffirms its commitment to working with all partners toward a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, in line with international law and advancing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking the Secretary General of the United Nations for his briefing and his commitment to supporting the two-state solution in favor of peace and security for Israel and Palestine. Yesterday, from the podium of the United Nations General Assembly at the Conference for the Two-State Solution, the President of the French Republic forcefully reminded us of what unites us: the urgency of ending the war in Gaza and giving peace a real chance. Today, at the Security Council, it is our collective responsibility to translate this demand into concrete decisions. Mr. President, France unequivocally condemns the terrorist attacks of October 7th, 2023. Nothing can justify terrorism. France also condemns the brutal attacks on innocent lives in Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of human beings have been plunged into hunger, fear, and mourning. France also rejects the unacceptable prospect of the forced displacement of the Gazan population. The expansion of the Israeli military offensive into Gaza City over the past week only inflicts further suffering on the population of Gaza. It is our duty to build a realistic alternative, faithful to our values and in accordance with international law. As famine continues to gain ground in the Gaza Strip, France is deeply concerned that this council failed to reach agreement last Thursday to call for a response to the humanitarian emergency. France's message is clear: all lives are equally valuable and all lives must be protected. The immediate and unconditional release of hostages still held by Hamas is a priority. This demand must go hand in hand with a permanent ceasefire in Gaza to end the suffering of the population in Gaza and allow for the safe, large-scale, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid. Mr. President, yesterday, the President of the French Republic announced France's recognition of the State of Palestine. This gesture reflects a profound conviction: the security of Israel and justice for the Palestinians are inseparable. They can only be guaranteed through the coexistence of two sovereign and democratic states living side by side in peace and security, with Jerusalem as their capital. This decision, shared by many other countries, opens a political path that we must consolidate. This path is structured around a roadmap, the New York Declaration, which France, along with Saudi Arabia and many partners, submitted and had adopted by the General Assembly, thanks to the support of 142 states. This roadmap is based on two essential stages. The first, the emergency phase, aims to secure the release of hostages, the cessation of hostilities, and large-scale humanitarian access. We call on all parties concerned to resume negotiations as soon as possible and in good faith. In this regard, we commend the tireless mediation efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. The second stage is stabilization and reconstruction. A transitional administration excluding Hamas must be established in Gaza under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, supported by the international community. It must ensure security, undertake the effective disarmament of Hamas, and address the urgent needs of the population. France, together with its European partners, stands ready to contribute, including through participation in an international stabilization mission to be decided by this Council at the appropriate time. This process also requires renewed and reformed Palestinian governance, fully implementing the commitments made. It also requires clear choices from Israel in favor of negotiation and respect for international law. The European Union, along with France, will condition its future cooperation on these commitments. Mr. President, the alternative is simple. Either we preserve the possibility of two states, and with it, peace, or we allow a permanent conflict to take hold with disastrous consequences for the region and beyond. France calls on this Council to act with the determination and sense of responsibility that is incumbent upon it. History will judge our ability to seize this moment. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. I find it, and we find it deeply regrettable that Council members have opted to convene this high-level UN Security Council briefing on Gaza on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, knowing full well that that decision excludes Israel. And frankly, colleagues, it's a testament to how this Council has prioritized a lot of performance over serious efforts to actually advance peace. Serious efforts that President Trump, Secretary Rubio, his team, and partners like Egypt and Qatar are engaged in right now as we speak, to end this horrific war. There have been over 80 Council meetings on this issue since October 7th. The main outcome of these meetings, unfortunately, has been to embolden Hamas, to undermine and disrupt negotiations that are aimed at freeing all of the hostages and ending the war and ending the suffering that we all want to end. Unspoken today, in the last 2 weeks alone, Israel has suffered 2 terrorist attacks in Jerusalem on September 8th and at the Allenby border crossing on September 18th. We condemn these attacks. We offer condolences to the families of those killed. We call upon other countries to join us in a clear and explicit condemnation of this violence by Hamas and its ideological allies. And extremists like the terrorists who killed 2 IDF soldiers on September 18th have shown their utter contempt for the people of Gaza. Hamas has shown its utter contempt for the people of Gaza. They struck the very border crossing through which nearly half of all aid delivered to Gaza between May and September of this year has passed. Let me say again, Hamas struck the border crossing through which half of all aid through the better part of this year has passed. No country here would willingly allow terrorists like this to threaten its people. Israel should not be expected to be any different. And of course, has the right to defend itself from groups that wish to do it harm. As Secretary of State Rubio recently said, as long as Hamas exists, there will be no peace in the Middle East. And every member here has seen evidence of how Hamas has starved hostages, has tortured them. We've heard the testimony of freed hostages and what they've endured in captivity. And sadly, some endure still. We, the United States, again demand Hamas immediately release all 48 remaining hostages and their remains, cease putting civilians in harm's way, cease sacrificing their own people for propaganda aims, that they disarm, and that they surrender. This war could end today if that happened. But Hamas refuses. While Israel has accepted the negotiators' proposals, rewarding Hamas's refusal, whether with performative conferences or one-sided Security Council resolutions, colleagues, it undermines and it delays achieving the peace we all want. Unfortunately, yesterday's conference spoke to domestic audiences, but it will prolong this tragic war in Gaza, and it will prolong the suffering. Hamas stands emboldened today after that conference. We've rewarded its obstruction. We've undermined efforts to achieve peace in both the short and the long term. Unilateral recognition statements do not alter the reality on the ground. It does not alter the fact that there is not a Palestinian state to recognize. And at this point, there is no credible Palestinian partner for peace. The Palestinian Authority leaders from Ramallah